Okay, this is page D1. All right, so we are now starting to talk about biological chemistry, the biologically important organic compounds. All right, so there are four major categories of biologically important organic compounds. And we actually identified them on the bottom of page C4. Those are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. That's what was listed at the bottom of C4. So we're going to start by talking about carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are sugars. Sugars are carbohydrates. Anytime we use the word carbs, we mean sugars. Talk about sugars, those are carbs. Now, these are made up mostly of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms. And there are sugars that are different number of carbon atoms long. We have learned that organic molecules are mostly made up of long chains of carbon atoms with hydrogens and other atoms attached. And so there are many, many sugars, hundreds and hundreds of different types of sugars. And I gave you two sugars that are 5 carbon atoms long to learn, and 3 sugars that are 6 carbon atoms long to learn. There are hundreds of sugars. These are just 5 out of hundreds. Ribose and deoxyribose are both 5 carbon atoms long. Ribose is an important sugar in a very complicated molecule called RNA, ribonucleic acid. And deoxyribose sugar is found in a even more important and more complex organic molecule called DNA, which stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Let's take a look at the pictures of this. This was on the previous video, but we're just backtracking a little bit. Let's look on page D9. I made a note, see page D9. So on page D9, this is showing a picture of the 5 carbon sugar ribose and the 5 carbon sugar deoxyribose. And when you compare them, there's only one difference between these two sugars. And the only difference between these two sugars is that, first of all, I want to remind you that if I circled any carbon atom, you'll notice it has 4 lines coming off it, because each carbon atom shares its 4 outer electrons with other atoms. And the term we use for sharing of electrons is covalent bond. Co means to share. Covalent means electron. So it always forms 4 covalent bonds with other carbons and hydrogens and oxygens and so on. So the essence of carbon is to share. The only difference between these two sugars I've circled. You'll notice that ribose has an OH here, and deoxyribose is missing an oxygen. In fact, that's what the word deoxy means. It means without an oxygen. So these are found in RNA and DNA respectively. Now, back on page D1, and we're going to go back to page D9 in a moment. So what about 6 carbon sugars? These are 6 carbon atoms long. And they are all 3, the 3 that I gave you are all used as sources of energy by living things. And that's glucose, fructose, and galactose. What's interesting about these 3 sugars that are each 6 carbon long is that they each have not only 6 carbon atoms, but they each have 12 hydrogens and 6 oxygens. That's called the molecular formula. They have the same molecular formula, the same number and types of atoms. So that raises the question then, well, how could they be 3 different sugars if they're exactly made up of 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens? And the answer to that is seen on page D9 again. On page D9, so here's those 3 sugars, and even though you can count them, they all 3 have 6 carbon atoms, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens, the atoms are arranged differently. They're arranged differently. So they all have different names because they're 3 different sugars. There's a term that we use when molecules have the same molecular formula. They have the same types and numbers of atoms, but they're arranged differently. And the term that we use is chemical isomers. Again, that's back on page D1. So the word chemical isomer, iso is a Greek root that means same. They're the same but different. They have the same molecular formula, but they're different. Where we saw that Greek root iso previously is in the word isotopes. We talked about stable and unstable isotopes of carbon, right? So they were all carbon. Carbon 12 and carbon 14 are both carbon atoms, but they're not the same. They vary in the number of neutrons. So these are chemicals with the same molecular formula, but a different arrangement of atoms. They're called chemical isomers. Now, these sugars, glucose, fructose, and galactose, are used as the principal energy sources by all living things. And we also wrote that these simple sugars are the basic molecules from which other types are synthesized. And here's what I mean by that. These simple sugars can be joined together to form double sugars or disaccharides. Or we can snap a whole bunch of these simple sugars together and form what are called polysaccharides, complex sugars. Not only can simple sugars be joined together to form larger sugars or larger carbohydrates, more complex carbohydrates, they can also be turned into other types of organic molecules. Sugars can be turned into fats. And we all know how sugars can be turned into fats. You'd say, well, like, how do we know? Because if you eat Halloween's coming up. If you eat a whole lot of candy, which is high in sugar, you'll get fat. Because the sugars can be turned into fat. So these sugars are the basic molecules that can be made into more complex molecules. Now, let's talk about disaccharides. So the prefix di means two, double, and they are formed by linking two mono. Mono means one, single sugars together, right? We join them together. And I'm giving you three disaccharides to know. Now, the three that we're asking you to know are sucrose, lactose, and maltose. Now, let's see what these look like. And you'll notice that the name of the process, the kind of chemical reaction where we join two simple organic molecules together to form a larger, more complex organic molecule, is called a dehydration synthesis reaction. Let me explain that term. Synthesis, syn means together. So synthesis means joining together. And the way organic molecules are commonly snapped together is by removing water. And the word we use for removing water is dehydrate. And you know that word, because if you had sweated a lot and lost a lot of water from your body, we'd say you were dehydrated. So dehydrate means to lose water. So that's the way these simple sugars are snapped together. Let's show you that. Let's go again to page D9. Now on page D9, in the second row on page D9, it has, they've drawn glucose again. And you'll notice it's labeled the open chain form of glucose. Here's the 6 carbon atoms in a row. They're numbered. But in reality, all of these sugars are actually looped into a ring shape. This is known as the cyclical or ring form of the molecule. So this is the way glucose really looks. It's not really 6 carbon atoms in a straight line. It's really looped into a ring shape. And from now on, in the drawings I show you and in your book, this is how these simple sugars will be depicted to you. This is glucose, and right in the third row, this is galactose, this is fructose, this is ribose. Now, I'm not asking you to memorize that this is fructose and that's galactose. I'm not. Well, all that I do expect you to recognize is that if you see molecules drawn like these, they are simple sugars. That you have to know. You don't have to know which simple sugar it is, but you've got to recognize that that's what a sugar looks like, because that's how it's shown in all your books. All right? So, in the lower left side, the lower left part of page D9, so it shows the ring form of fructose, which is a simple sugar, and the ring form of glucose, and it shows how they can be joined together to form a disaccharide called sucrose. And you'll notice that the way they're joined together, and this is very common, we're going to see this kind of chemical reaction over and over and over again in this class. A hydrogen atom is removed from one of the sugars. You don't need to remember which one. And OH is removed from the other sugar. You don't have to remember which one. Now, what do you get if you combine a hydrogen with an OH? What does that form? H plus OH forms H2O, water. So, a hydrogen and an OH are removed from two sugars, forming water, and where the H and the OH used to be is where these two sugars snap together. The name of this kind of biochemical reaction is a dehydration synthesis reaction. A great name. Synthesis means to join together, and how do we join them together? By taking away water, dehydrate. So that's very descriptive. Now that forms, again, this disaccharide called sucrose. You'd say, well, what's sucrose? That's cane sugar. You know, C&H sugar from Hawaii, from sugar cane. That's the common sugar that we put in our coffee, that we use all the time. It's sucrose. So it's actually made up of two simple sugars. Now this is a reversible reaction. So, in fact, when you eat sucrose, which is, you know, C&H sugar from Hawaii, in your digestive tract, you actually break it apart back into the two simple sugars, glucose and fructose. Now, how does our digestive system break it apart? In order to break this apart, we have to add water back because water had been removed to join them together. So the process of adding water in order to break it apart into the two simple sugars, that's called a hydrolysis reaction. Again, it's a great name. Hydro. Does anybody know what hydro means? Water. And lysis is one of the most important Greek roots that appears in biology. This Greek root lysis appears over and over and over and over again. You're going to keep hearing this root lysis. It means to break apart. So we're adding water to lyse, or break apart the disaccharide into two simple sugars, or monosaccharides. So that's what happens in our digestive tract. And then our digestive system absorbs these two simple sugars. And that's what we absorb into our body. Our body cannot absorb a disaccharide or anything even larger. It can only absorb these very simple monosaccharides. So the whole process of digestion is breaking apart disaccharides or even larger, more complex sugars, carbohydrates, into simple monosaccharides to absorb them. All right, so back on page D1, so we've explained what a dehydration synthesis reaction is. Some books will call it a condensation reaction. I'll use the term dehydration synthesis, but some books do call it that. And the opposite of that is called a hydrolysis reaction. All right, now we're giving you 3 disaccharides to know, just like we've given you a number of monosaccharides to know. Sucrose, lactose, and maltose. Sucrose, we wrote, is table sugar, cane sugar. Cane meaning from sugar cane, you know, C&H sugar from Hawaii. It's made up of glucose and fructose. You might say, like, do we have to know that? The answer is yes. Another disaccharide we want you to know is lactose. Lacto means milk. If a woman is lactating, she's producing milk to nurse her baby. So this, in fact, lactose is the sugar in milk. It's the sugar in cow's milk. It's the sugar in human mother's milk. It's the sugar in all milk from any organism. That's the sugar. Now, it doesn't, you might say, but milk doesn't taste that sweet. And the answer is not all sugars taste equally sweet. And I'll have more to say about that in a moment. Lactose is actually made up of glucose and galactose joined together. So, in fact, when you drink some milk or eat any dairy product containing this sugar called lactose, we cannot absorb lactose. We have to digest it, break it apart into glucose and galactose by a hydrolysis reaction in our digestive tract, and then we absorb glucose and galactose. Now, we're going to be learning later that in order to do these digestive reactions, not only does hydrolysis require water, but it also requires a digestive enzyme. And some people, as they get older, their digestive system loses the ability to make this digestive enzyme called lactase. So when they drink milk, they actually they can't digest the lactose into glucose and galactose, so they actually get cramps and diarrhea. So we say that those people who really cannot digest lactose that's in dairy products, we say they are lactose intolerant. They don't tolerate lactose well. And they sell special milk like lactate milk where the lactose is already hydrolyzed into glucose and galactose for you. And if you actually taste it, it tastes much sweeter than regular milk. Because glucose tastes sweet, but combined with galactose to form lactose, it doesn't taste that sweet. All right, so you need to know what the sugar is in milk. And then the third disaccharide we want you to know is maltose. Now, maltose is a sugar found in all grains. It's commonly known as grain sugar. And it's really just made up of two glucoses, two glucose sugars joined together. Yes, you'll have to know that, so you want to make a little study card. How do you remember maltose is in grains? Think of maltomeal. Maltomeal is a cereal, and there's maltose in it. You may have heard the expression barley malt. So we'll talk about barley, using barley malt to ferment it and make beer and other alcoholic drinks. But you're using, anytime using a grain, it's got maltose in it. That's barley malt. That malt refers to maltose. All right, well, let me just kind of mention parenthetically a topic here that we're not going to really test you on per se. I mentioned that not all sugars taste sweet to us. So this is a little chart where it indicates the relative sweetness of different sugars. And how they did this analysis is they gave people a group of people different sugars to taste. They started first with sucrose. That's the common sugar we put in our coffee, you know, C&H sugar from Hawaii. And they said, okay, everybody taste the sugar. Okay, does it taste sweet? Everybody says, yeah, it tastes sweet. Let's assume, therefore, that sucrose has a rating, a sweetness rating of 100. Now we're going to give you other sugars to taste. If the sugar tastes less sweet, give it a lower numerical rating. If the sugar tastes even sweeter than C&H sugar from Hawaii, then give it a higher numerical rating. So you'll notice that lactose was just given a rating of 16, meaning everybody finds that it doesn't taste very sweet. You'll notice, however, that fructose has a rating of 173. I'm not asking you to memorize these numbers, but obviously what people say is when they taste fructose, that tastes a lot sweeter to them than the common sugar that we use to sweeten things. Now, how you run into this in some foods, it'll say sweetened with fructose. Now, is fructose healthier than sucrose? No, it's not any healthier. In fact, sucrose actually is made up of glucose and fructose. But fructose by itself tastes sweeter than sucrose, so while it's not any healthier for you, because it tastes sweeter to our taste buds on our tongue, you don't have to use as much of it to make something taste as sweet as if you were using sucrose. So if a food, a product is sweetened with fructose, they don't have to add as much of it to make it taste equally sweet as if they were using the more common sucrose sugar. Now, also shown here are the last three are called artificial sweeteners. These are not sugars at all. Cyclamates, saccharin, and aspartame, which goes under a number of brand names. One of them is Nutrasweet. What are these artificial sweeteners? These are not sugars at all. They are simply organic molecules, hydrocarbon molecules, that taste really sweet to our taste buds, the sensory neurons on our tongue. So, in fact, you'll notice that if we look at Nutrasweet, it has a rating of 20,000 compared to this table sugar, which is 100. So, in other words, it tastes, what, 200 times sweeter than the commonly used sugar. So, therefore, they only have to add a little tiny bit of it to whatever you're eating or drinking to make it taste really sweet. So that's why it really contributes almost no calories in these artificial sweeteners, because it just takes a few molecules of this stuff to stimulate our taste buds and make it taste really, really sweet. So these artificial sweeteners are primarily used so people either who want to not take in as many calories of energy using regular sugar, so they use these artificial sweeteners, or they may be diabetics who cannot use regular sugar because diabetes is a problem where the person has too high of sugar levels in their bloodstream, so they are told to reduce their use of sugar, so they use these artificial sweeteners. A couple last comments about these. Now, the very first of the artificial sweeteners was called cyclamate. You don't have to know it, but cyclamate is no longer used as an artificial sweetener because a number of research studies showed that when they gave really high amounts of this artificial sweetener to rats and mice, some of the mice and rats would develop tumors. And some tumors can turn into malignant tumors, which is another way of saying cancer. So the FDA, the United States Food and Drug Administration, banned the use of cyclamates as an artificial sweetener. Now, I want to emphasize, this doesn't mean that everybody who used cyclamates was going to get to grow tumors and have cancer. But there was, they gave these really high amounts to these mice and rats. A person would have to eat like whole bags of sugar every day, or cyclamates every day to really cause something comparable in humans. But they just didn't want to take any chances. Now, saccharin, which is still available as an artificial sweetener, has similarly been found to cause tumors in lab animals when they give them really high amounts. The FDA did not ban saccharin like they did with cyclamates, but they actually require a warning label so that any food that is sweetened with saccharin has a warning label that the FDA has identified that this causes tumors in lab animals. Now you might ask, well, why didn't they ban it outright? And the main reason why they didn't ban it is because consumers didn't want them to ban these artificial sweeteners, either because they want them so that they can use these diet products that don't have sugars in them, or because the diabetics can't use sugar, so they wanted to have something that tasted sweet. You might say, well, shouldn't the government ban these things? I mean, if they could cause problems. Well, this is the challenge that the government has in trying to protect us. Should the government ban the use of cigarettes where we know for sure they increase our risk of lung cancer? Yeah. Well, yeah, but how about the people who smoke? Do they want it banned? Yeah. And if we do ban them, are a lot of people going to be going over to Tijuana and picking up cigarettes from Mexico and sneaking them in here? Yeah. So, what they do now, of course, on cigarettes, where we know for sure they increase your risk of lung cancer, it's not even a question, is they put a warning that the Surgeon General has found that this causes lung cancer. It says it right there in big red letters on the package of cigarettes. Does that stop everybody from smoking? No. It says it causes lung cancer. It doesn't say it causes tumors in lab animals. It causes lung cancer in humans. So it still doesn't stop people. They have another problem. So if you buy anything that's got alcohol in it, if you buy some beer, some wine, anything alcoholic, you ever notice it's got a warning label? No, yeah, you don't know. Well, it's important, especially for women, because it says what? Oh, it may cause birth defects. Yeah. And so the problem is that the embryo is actually 2 weeks old before a woman actually knows she's pregnant. The government has not banned alcohol. Did the U.S. government ever ban alcohol? Yeah. Yes, they did. They tried to ban it, and it didn't work because everybody wanted it so much. So, there's a challenge in society. On the one hand, we want the government to protect us from things that might harm us, and on the other hand, we say it's our right to decide whether we want this or not. Right? So a lot of us would advocate, we should legalize even more things that are illegal, whether it's marijuana or anything else. So this is the debate that goes on. To what extent should the society protect us from causing harm to ourselves and those around us? And to what extent should it be our right to decide what we do to ourselves, and sometimes even to those around us? I'm not answering the question. I'm simply showing you how this relates to this broader political question of what do we permit and what do we ban in terms of trying to provide some balance between protecting the consumer and giving people the right. I'll mention one other thing. A lot of people take vitamins and herbal products, and most of the time, especially the herbal products, they have not been approved by the FDA. There's no proof that they do anything. And there may even be some possibility that some of these herbal products may actually not be good for you at all. The problem is, every time the Congress has thought about regulating vitamins and minerals, requiring a prescription, requiring research on this to validate that it works, consumers get up in arms and they say, it's my right to take whatever herbal product or vitamin or mineral or anything I want, don't ban it. So they haven't. But that doesn't mean that it does anything good for you. It may not. It hasn't been, it's not regulated by the FDA, the vitamins and minerals. All right, so that's what I was going to say about that. Let me just mention one last artificial sweetener. It's not on here, but I'm just going to show you a diagram. You don't have to worry about it. But this is, have you ever heard of Splenda?
Yes.
So the question is, what the hell is Splenda? Now, what's really interesting about Splenda, which comes in that kind of purple and yellow package, kind of yellow and blue, whatever. Yellow and blue or white, I don't know. But is that if you've ever looked at the package, it says it's made from sugar. Did anybody ever see that? It says it's made from sugar, and it's got no calories. So how can it be made from sugar and have no calories? So I'll explain it to you. The technical name for Splenda is Sucralose. Here's what it is. This is sucrose. Remember, sucrose, we just learned, is a disaccharide. It's two monosaccharides joined together. So here's how they make Splenda. They basically, you see these OHs on the sugar? They basically substitute for these OHs chlorine. And so they, in these three places where there were naturally 3 OH atoms, they put a chlorine atom. Does everybody see that? So now we've got chlorine atoms. That does two things. One thing it does is this stuff called sucralose or Splenda tastes 600 times sweeter than this by putting that chlorine. So that just tastes really sweet, which means you don't have to use as much. And the other thing it does is that we cannot digest this. You see, we can digest, which means split sucrose apart into glucose and fructose and absorb those sugars into our body, and they become a source of calories of energy, or just calories. All right? Our digestive our digestive system cannot split this apart. So since we cannot split it apart, we cannot digest it, we cannot absorb it. So therefore, we do not gain any calories from this stuff. So in fact, it is made from sugar, but it's been modified. It tastes really sweet. We cannot digest it, we cannot absorb it. It just goes right through our digestive system and comes out the other end in the stool. And interestingly, not only can we not digest it, but neither can bacteria. So since bacteria can't digest it either, it doesn't contribute to dental cavities. All right? Bacteria can digest sucrose, so any bits of sugar you leave in your mouth, they feed on it and they multiply in your mouth, right? Creating cavities and bad breath. But they can't digest this stuff just like we can, so it doesn't contribute to cavities. So anyhow, that's what Splenda is. Yeah.
Compared to other artificial sweeteners, isn't Splenda worse or better than the other one?
Well, again, the simple answer, because if you get into complex research, all things can have some possible side effects and bad effects. Usually, there's not a problem unless you're consuming large amounts. I would say the best thing is moderation. All right, just use things in moderation and don't overdo it with anything. And that includes using regular table sugar, using Splenda, or anything else. That's probably the safest approach. Anytime you start to go really crazy with anything, then look, we pointed out too much sugar. Sugar is nothing wrong with sugar. Too much sugar is related to diabetes. Nothing wrong with salt. We need salt. Too much salt contributes to high blood pressure. We're going to be learning cholesterol is actually a necessary nutrient. But too much cholesterol leads to a condition called atherosclerosis, arteriosclerosis. So the best thing is don't go overindulge in anything and you're probably fine. You know, quote, well-balanced meal, eating.
So you can't use a hydrolysis reaction because the 2 H's and the O would...
The chlorine, the enzyme that normally is in our body that splits this apart cannot split this apart because this is not natural. And the enzyme is, in a sense, designed to break apart what's naturally in our food, and this is something that's man-made. And so our natural enzyme in our digestive tract cannot split it apart.